This case, again, I'll just promise that I'll give it to you, and that way you're not worrying about whether you need to get access to it or not. This is, particularly in Melbourne, this is a very famous case. It's the one of Solomon Lew. Now, he's the fellow behind a whole range of retail chains, and most famously back in the day, he was one of the large shareholders, a shareholder block in the Myer Group. Now, for those that you remember, and don't quote me on all of these dates, I think it was back in around the year 2000, the government at the time was talking about bringing in entity taxation. And entity taxation was in relation to effectively treating all entities the same. All entities the same, and particularly in relation to family trusts, effectively taxing them as companies. And there was a particular, they wrote the legislation, it's still sitting somewhere down there in Canberra. They wrote the legislation, and one of the key concepts out of that was this idea of the profits first rule. And that, for those of you, I'm showing my age here, a bit. Those of you that went around at the time, that was a really big issue, and there were a lot of advisory firms around that were saying, look, if you've got profits or growth, unrealised profits trapped inside a family trust, you need to get them out, because if you don't get them out before they bring in entity taxation, they'll be trapped inside the trust and they'll be taxed at the 30% rate, and you'll lose a whole lot of money. So Mr. Lew, I think he's a Mr., got some advice at the time from his advisor, had a whole heap, tens of millions of dollars of unrealised profits inside the trust, and they went and implemented an asset revaluation reserve. So that was step one. Step two was that they distributed this notional gain, the notional profit, they distributed that to a whole range of people, including their daughter and their son. And that's about all the evidence that we're able to glean out of the cases, because there was really no other documentation that was available. What then happened was that these adult children had basically at the same time, both the sister and the brother busted up with their husband and their wife respectively, so there were divorces. And then what happened was that a debate ensued. And the debate was around issues such as, well, were the distributions made to the couple jointly, or were they just made to the spouse? And in the family law context, I've got to say that at itself probably wasn't going to change things much. I mean, even if it was just to the kids, there was still a live and a big live issue there from a family law perspective. The more important issue was the significant lack of documentation. Significant lack of documentation, because what Mr. Lew was arguing was that that distribution was only ever done on paper, and then what actually happened was that all of the kids were required to gift the money back into the trust. Okay, to gift the money back into the trust. You don't need to be a whiz-bang family lawyer to work out what the former spouses were arguing. The former spouses were arguing, like, that's just not the case at all. Yes, the money went back into the trust, and we accept that the balance sheet shows that, and that there's evidence to support that it went back in. But we were always under the impression that we had loaned the money back in. We'd loaned the money back in. And if that's the case, we've got this enormous asset that has to be divvied up as part of the family law proceedings. Now, that particular case, I can't give you the answer to what actually happened at the end of that. That settled after a very public stoush where all four of these parties were in court with Mr. Lew and his wife around what had actually happened there. The principle for today is right back to the very start. Rule 1, find the deed. Rule 2, remember Rule 1. Rule 3, the deed is more than the physical trust instrument. It's all the things that sit around it, including deeds of gift, loan agreements, balance sheets, and actual documentary evidence